Marcus Rodriguez stepped off the transport truck at Camp Thunder Ridge, his boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The desert air was thick and dry, carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder from the nearby shooting ranges. He adjusted the strap of his rifle case and looked around at the sprawling military training facility that would be his home for the next 6 months. The other soldiers watched him with curious eyes. Word had already spread through the camp about the new arrival. Marcus was 24 years old, fresh from sniper school, but his reputation had somehow preceded him. Stories about his incredible accuracy during training exercises had filtered through military networks faster than wildfire. Some called them rumors. Others whispered that he was something special. Sergeant Williams, a weathered man in his 40s with arms covered in faded tattoos, approached Marcus with a clipboard in hand. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held a hint of skepticism. He had seen many confident young soldiers arrive at Thunder Ridge, all claiming to be the next great marksman. Most of them left humbled by the desert's harsh training conditions. "Rodriguez, right?" Williams asked, glancing at his paperwork. "I've heard some interesting things about you from Fort Benning. They say you can hit targets that most people can't even see properly through their scopes." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I do my best, Sergeant. I'm here to learn and improve like everyone else." Williams couldn't help but crack a small smile at the young man's modesty. "Well, we'll see about that. This isn't training camp anymore, soldier. Out here we work with equipment that most marksmen only dream about. Tomorrow morning you'll meet the XM-09 Horizon. It's a prototype rifle that's been giving even our best shooters trouble. Think you're ready for something like that?" The XM-09 Horizon was legendary among military snipers, though few had ever actually used one. It was an experimental long-range precision rifle designed for extreme distances, equipped with advanced ballistics computers and environmental sensors. The weapon was so sophisticated that it required extensive training just to understand its basic functions. Many experienced marksmen had struggled to master its complex systems. That evening, Marcus sat in the mess hall, eating his dinner quietly while listening to conversations at nearby tables. The other soldiers were discussing upcoming training exercises, sharing stories about their most challenging shots, and debating the effectiveness of different rifle platforms. He noticed that several groups kept glancing in his direction, clearly talking about the new arrival. Corporal Thompson, a stocky man with bright red hair, finally approached Marcus's table. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, already sliding into the opposite chair before waiting for an answer. "So you're the famous Rodriguez everyone's been talking about. I've been stationed here for 2 years and I've never seen the brass get this excited about a new arrival." Marcus set down his fork and looked up. "I'm not famous, just someone who enjoys precision shooting. What's it like here?" "The training. Thompson laughed and shook his head. "Enjoy it? That's a new one. Most people respect it, fear it, or hate it, but enjoy. This place will test everything you think you know about shooting. The distances we work with here are insane. We're talking about targets so far away that you need to account for the Earth's rotation. Wind patterns change 3 times before your bullet reaches its destination. It's not just about having a steady hand anymore." As Thompson spoke, Marcus felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. Throughout his life, he had always been drawn to challenges that others found impossible. In high school, he had spent countless hours practicing with his grandfather's old hunting rifle, setting up targets at increasingly distant ranges in the family's sprawling farmland. His grandfather, a veteran of 3 wars, had taught him that patience and understanding were just as important as natural talent. The next morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise painting the desert mountains in shades of gold and orange. Marcus reported to the advanced training range at 0600 hours, where Sergeant Williams was waiting beside a locked equipment shed. The morning air was still cool, but everyone knew that within a few hours the temperature would climb above 100 degrees. "Before we bring out the big guns," Williams said, "I want to see what you can do with standard equipment. We've got targets set up at various distances, starting at 800 yards and going out to 1500. Show me that the stories about you aren't just hot air." Marcus nodded and accepted the M24 sniper rifle that Williams handed him. It was a weapon he knew well from his previous training. He spent several minutes checking the scope, testing the bolt action, and getting a feel for the rifle's balance. Other soldiers had gathered around the range to watch the demonstration, their conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation. The first target was a standard military silhouette at 800 yards. Marcus settled into a prone position, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger with smooth precision. The target dropped immediately. He moved to the next distance without hesitation, then the next. Each shot found its mark with mechanical consistency. By the time he reached the 1,500-yard targets, a crowd of nearly 30 soldiers had gathered. These were distances that challenged even experienced marksmen, requiring careful calculation of wind speed, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions. Marcus took his time with each shot, but his accuracy never wavered. Target after target fell in quick succession. Williams watched through binoculars, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to amazement. "I'll be damned," he muttered, under his breath. "The kid's the real deal." When the demonstration was complete, the assembled soldiers erupted in applause and cheers. Marcus stood up, brushing dust from his uniform, and looked questioningly at Williams. The sergeant was grinning now, his earlier doubts completely erased. "All right, Rodriguez," Williams said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I think you're ready to meet the XM-09. Tomorrow morning we'll see if you can handle the real challenge. There's a target out there at 2,850 yards that's been laughing at our best shooters for months. Think you might be interested in shutting it up?" The next morning, Marcus arrived at the advanced range before dawn. The desert was still wrapped in darkness, with only the first hints of light beginning to touch the eastern horizon. Sergeant Williams was already there, standing beside a large, black case that looked more like it belonged in a science laboratory than on a military range. "The XM-09 Horizon," Williams said, patting the case with something approaching reverence. "This weapon represents 5 years of research and development. It cost more than most people make in a decade, and only 12 of them exist in the world. You're about to become one of maybe 50 people who have ever fired one." When Williams opened the case, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The rifle was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its sleek black frame was covered with digital displays, environmental sensors, and adjustment controls that looked more suited to a spacecraft than a firearm. The scope was massive, with multiple lenses and what appeared to be a small computer screen built into its side. "The effective range on this weapon is over 3,000 yards, Williams explained, lifting the rifle carefully from its foam padding. "It has an integrated ballistics computer that automatically calculates wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, temperature, and even the angle of the Earth's rotation. The ammunition is specially manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch." Marcus accepted the weapon with both hands, immediately noting its weight and perfect balance. Despite all the advanced technology, it felt solid and purposeful in his grip. The stock was adjustable in multiple directions, and the trigger had a crisp, clean break that spoke of precision engineering. "The computer system learns from each shot," Williams continued. "It builds a database of environmental conditions and bullet performance that becomes more accurate with every round fired. But here's the catch. All that technology is useless if the shooter doesn't understand the fundamentals. The rifle can calculate everything perfectly, but it still needs a human being to make the final decision about when to pull the trigger." They reburn. The next hour, Williams walked Marcus through the rifle's various systems. The scope could switch between multiple magnification levels with the press of a button. The ballistics computer could store data for different ammunition types and automatically adjust calculations based on current conditions. Environmental sensors continuously monitored wind patterns at multiple distances along the bullet's flight path. "The target we're going to attempt," Williams said, pointing toward a distant ridge barely visible through the morning haze, "is at exactly 2,850 yards. That's over 1.5 miles. At that distance, your bullet will be in the air for more than 3 seconds. During that time, wind conditions can change, temperature can shift, and even tiny variations in your shooting position can throw off the shot by several feet." Marcus studied the distant ridge through the rifle's scope. Even at maximum magnification, the target appeared as nothing more than a small dot against the rocky landscape. He could see heat shimmer already beginning to rise from the desert floor as the sun climbed higher. creating optical distortions that would make accurate ranging even more difficult. "Who else has attempted this shot?" Marcus asked, making minor adjustments to the scope's focus. Williams chuckled. "Pretty much everyone. We've had Olympic shooters, military champions, guys with 20 years of combat experience. The closest anyone has come was about 18 inches low and 2 feet to the left. The guy who made that shot is considered something of a legend around here." As the morning progressed, Williams introduced Marcus to the spotting team that would assist with the record attempt. There was Corporal Henderson, a meteorology specialist who monitored weather conditions with scientific precision. Staff Sergeant Kim used advanced range-finding equipment to measure exact distances and elevation changes. Private First Class Johnson operated high-powered spotting scopes that could track bullet impacts at extreme ranges. "This isn't just about one person making a great shot," Williams explained. "At these distances, it becomes a team effort. Everyone has to perform their job perfectly for the attempt to succeed." The team spent the rest of the morning taking baseline measurements and establishing communication protocols. Henderson set up a portable weather station that monitored conditions at multiple elevations along the bullet's projected flight path. Kim used laser rangefinders to confirm the exact distance to the target, accounting for elevation changes and atmospheric refraction. During lunch break, word had spread throughout the camp about the afternoon's attempt. Soldiers began gathering at observation points where they could watch the shot through binoculars and spotting scopes. The betting pool that started as a joke had grown to include nearly half the camp's population. "No pressure," Thompson said, slapping Marcus on the back as they finished eating. "But you should know that there are about 200 people out there who are convinced you're going to miss by a mile. The smart money is on the bullet landing somewhere in the next county." Marcus smiled but felt a familiar calm settling over him. This was the feeling he remembered from hunting trips with his grandfather, when they would spend entire days tracking a single deer through dense forest. His grandfather had taught him that the most difficult shots weren't about forcing success through determination, but about finding the perfect moment when all conditions aligned. The key, his grandfather had once told him, isn't to fight against the environment. It's to understand it so well that you become part of it. When you can feel the wind the same way the bullet will feel it, when you can sense tiny changes in temperature and humidity, that's when the impossible shots become possible. As the afternoon sun reached its peak, Williams called the team together for final preparations. The target had been confirmed and marked with high visibility panels that would make bullet impacts easier to spot. Communication lines had been tested and backup equipment was standing by in case of technical failures. "The conditions look about as good as they're going to get," Henderson reported. "Wind is steady at 7 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature is 103 degrees and humidity is holding at 12%. We've got maybe a 2-hour window before thermal activity makes the shot impossible." Marcus nodded and settled into his shooting position behind the XM-09. Through the scope, he could see the target clearly now, a steel plate measuring 18 inches square mounted on a sturdy frame. It looked impossibly small and distant, wavering slightly in the heat shimmer that rose from the desert floor. The ballistics computer hummed quietly as it processed environmental data and calculated the necessary adjustments. Numbers scrolled across the small display screen, showing wind compensation, bullet drop, and flight time predictions. Everything indicated that the shot was theoretically possible, but theory and reality were often very different things at extreme ranges. "Whenever you're ready," Williams said quietly, settling in beside Marcus with his spotting scope. "Take your time and make it count. This is the kind of shot that people remember for the rest of their lives." As Marcus prepared for his attempt, news of the shot had reached beyond Camp Thunder Ridge. A convoy of unmarked vehicles appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust clouds as they approached the training facility. The new arrivals moved with the quiet efficiency of elite military units, their presence immediately noticeable to anyone familiar with special operations personnel. Sergeant Williams glanced up from his spotting scope and frowned. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like we've got company." The vehicle stopped at the range perimeter and a group of 6 men emerged. They wore no visible unit patches or rank insignia, but their bearing and equipment marked them as something special. These were the soldiers that other soldiers whispered about, the ones who operated in places that didn't officially exist, completing missions that were never publicly acknowledged. The team leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes and weathered hands, approached Williams with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. His teammates spread out along the observation line, setting up advanced optics equipment with practiced ease. "Sergeant Williams," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Colonel Hayes. We heard there might be something interesting happening out here today. Mind if we observe?" Williams recognized the type immediately. These were operators from one of the military's most elite units, probably Rangers or Delta Force, though he knew better than to ask directly. Their presence at a training exercise could only mean one thing. Someone higher up the chain of command had taken notice of Marcus and the XM-09 project. "Of course, Colonel. We're just about to attempt a shot at 2850 yards. The new man here thinks he can make it work." Hayes studied Marcus through tactical sunglasses, his expression unreadable. "Rodriguez, right? We've been hearing interesting things about you through certain channels. Word is you've got a natural gift for long-range work?" Marcus nodded respectfully but kept his focus on the rifle systems. The attention was flattering, but he had learned long ago that the best way to handle pressure was to ignore everything except the fundamentals of marksmanship. His grandfather had taught him that shooting was a conversation between the marksman, the weapon, and the environment. Everything else was just noise. One of the operators, a compact man with the call sign Ghost embroidered on his equipment, set up a sophisticated spotting scope that looked like it belonged in an observatory. "Sir," he called to Hayes, "we've got clear visibility on the target. Wind conditions look stable and atmospheric distortion is minimal for this time of day." The arrival of the Special Operations Team had created a buzz of excitement among the camp's regular soldiers. These were men who had become legends within military circles, known for their ability to accomplish impossible missions under the most challenging conditions. The fact that they had traveled to Thunder Ridge specifically to watch Marcus's attempt spoke volumes about the shot's significance. "You know," Hayes said quietly to Williams, "we've been working on some projects that require extreme precision at very long ranges. The kind of work we're missing by 6 inches instead of hitting dead center can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. If your boy here can consistently make shots at these distances, there might be some very interesting opportunities in his future." Williams nodded, understanding the implications. The military's elite units were always looking for soldiers with exceptional skills, and marksmanship at extreme ranges was becoming increasingly valuable in modern warfare. The ability to neutralize threats from distances beyond the enemy's ability to respond was a tactical advantage that could change the outcome of entire operations. Marcus adjusted his breathing and began the mental checklist his grandfather had taught him years ago. First, verify the rifle's zero and mechanical settings. Second, confirm environmental conditions and ballistic calculations. Third, establish a stable shooting position and natural point of aim. Fourth, control breathing and heart rate. Finally, trust the fundamentals and execute the shot with confidence. The XM-09's ballistics computer displayed a constant stream of data, updating environmental readings every few seconds. Wind speed had dropped slightly to 6.5 miles per hour, still from the northwest. Temperature was holding steady at 103 degrees. Barometric pressure remained stable, and humidity had actually dropped to 11% as the afternoon heat intensified. Range confirmed at 2,850 yards, Kim reported from his position with the laser rangefinder. Elevation difference is 47 feet. Target is below our position. Atmospheric conditions are within acceptable parameters for the shot. Henderson consulted his weather monitoring equipment and gave a thumbs up. Wind pattern is holding steady. We've got maybe another hour before thermal activity starts creating serious problems with target acquisition. Through the scope, Marcus could see the steel target plate wavering slightly in the heat shimmer. At this magnification, even tiny movements were amplified dramatically. He would need to time the shot for a moment when atmospheric distortion was minimal and all environmental factors aligned perfectly. The gathered audience had grown to include nearly the entire camp. Word of the Special Operations Team's arrival had spread quickly, and everyone understood that they were witnessing something potentially historic. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might somehow interfere with the delicate process of extreme precision shooting. Colonel Hayes positioned himself where he could observe both Marcus and the distant target through his own high-powered optics. His team members took up positions that would allow them to track the bullet's flight path and impact with scientific precision. These men had witnessed some of the most remarkable feats of military skill, but even they seemed impressed by the technical challenge represented by the 2,850-yard shot. "You know," Hayes said to one of his operators, "in our line of work, we sometimes need to reach out and touch someone at distances that push the absolute limits of what's possible. Having a marksman who can consistently make shots like this would give us capabilities that our enemies couldn't even imagine." Marcus felt the weight of expectation settling around him like a heavy blanket. The presence of elite operators, the gathering crowd, the advanced equipment, all of it added pressure that could easily throw off his concentration. He closed his eyes for a moment and recalled his grandfather's voice. "The target doesn't care who's watching, boy. The bullet doesn't know how many people have bet against you. Focus on what matters. The fundamentals never change." When he opened his eyes again, the world had narrowed to include only the essential elements: the crosshairs of the scope, the distant target, the gentle pressure of the trigger against his finger. Everything else faded into background noise as he entered the focused mental state that had made him exceptional at long-range shooting. The XM-09's advanced systems hummed quietly, processing thousands of calculations per second and providing him with the most accurate ballistic solution possible. But Marcus knew that all the technology in the world couldn't replace the human elements that made the difference in extreme shooting: patience, timing, and the ability to feel when conditions were perfect for the shot. He settled deeper into his shooting position, allowing his body to find its natural point of aim. The rifle's stock fitted perfectly against his shoulder, and the scope's eye relief was positioned exactly where he needed it. His breathing slowed to a steady rhythm, and his heart rate dropped as his nervous system entered the calm, focused state that marked a true marksman. The desert had fallen into an unusual stillness. Even the constant wind that typically swept across the training range had diminished to barely perceptible movements. Marcus could feel the subtle changes in air pressure against his skin, the way a sailor might sense an approaching storm hours before it appeared on the horizon. "Wind has dropped to 4 miles per hour, Henderson whispered into his radio. "Direction holding steady at northwest. Atmospheric conditions are about as stable as we're going to see today." Through the XM-09 scope, Marcus watched the target, with the intensity of a predator studying its prey. The steel plate seemed to float in the heat shimmer, occasionally becoming crystal clear before dissolving back into the wavering distortion of superheated air. He needed to time his shot for one of those moments of perfect clarity. Colonel Hayes had positioned himself behind a high-powered spotting scope, his years of combat experience allowing him to read environmental conditions with the expertise of a professional meteorologist. "I've seen shots attempted at these distances in combat situations," he murmured to Williams. "The margin for error is essentially zero. Everything has to be perfect: the equipment, the calculations, the execution, and a fair amount of luck." The ballistics computer continued its constant stream of calculations, updating its firing solution based on real-time environmental data. The numbers on the display showed a bullet drop of over 40 feet, requiring the rifle to be aimed significantly above the target. Wind drift compensation added another layer of complexity, requiring the crosshairs to be positioned several feet to the left of the intended impact point. Marcus had fired thousands of rounds during his training, but never at a distance approaching 2,850 yards. At his grandfather's farm, the longest shots had been maybe 800 yards across open pasture land. Military training had extended his range to about 1,500 yards with conventional equipment. The XM-09 represented a quantum leap in capability, but it also demanded a level of precision that pushed the boundaries of human skill. "Take your time," Williams said softly. "There's no rush. Wait for the perfect moment when everything feels right." The words reminded Marcus of countless hunting trips when his grandfather would make them wait motionless for hours, until conditions were ideal for a clean shot. Patience is the marksman's greatest weapon, the old man had always said. Anyone can pull a trigger quickly. Only a true shooter knows when not to. Through the scope, Marcus could see tiny details on the distant target that were invisible to the naked eye. The steel plate was mounted on a sturdy frame, with high-visibility orange panels attached to make bullet impacts easier to spot. Around the target, he could see the rocky terrain of the ridge dotted with desert vegetation and carved by erosion into countless small canyons and ridges. The distance was so extreme that the bullet would actually follow a curved trajectory, rising, initially before beginning its long arc downward toward the target. During its flight time of over 3 seconds, the Earth would rotate slightly. The wind might shift, and temperature variations could affect the bullet's ballistic performance in subtle but measurable ways. Bullet flight time is calculated at 3.2 seconds, Kim reported from his position with the advanced ballistics equipment. Target movement due to Earth's rotation is negligible at this range and latitude. Primary variables are wind speed, direction, and thermal deviation. Marcus felt his breathing settle into the slow, controlled rhythm that marked a marksman preparing for an extreme shot. His heart rate had dropped to almost resting levels, and his hands were steady, despite the enormous pressure of the moment. The rifle felt like an extension of his body, perfectly balanced and responsive to the slightest adjustment. One of the special operations observers, the man called Ghost, was tracking conditions through his own sophisticated optics. "Sir," he called quietly to Colonel Hayes, "we've got a developing thermal layer about halfway to the target. It's creating some optical distortion, but it's not moving much. If he's going to take the shot, the next few minutes look optimal." The thermal layer Ghost had identified was invisible to casual observation, but Marcus could see it through the high-powered scope as a shimmering band of distorted air. Such phenomena were common in desert environments, created when air masses of different temperatures met and created optical effects similar to a mirage. Timing the shot to minimize its impact would require careful observation and perfect execution. Marcus made minute adjustments to his shooting position, ensuring that his body was perfectly aligned behind the rifle. The XM-09's adjustable stock allowed him to achieve a level of consistency that would have been impossible with conventional equipment. Every point of contact between his body and the weapon was optimized for stability and repeatability. The crosshairs in the scope had been positioned according to the ballistics computer's calculations, aimed at a point in empty air several feet above and to the left of the actual target. To an untrained observer, it would have appeared that Marcus was aiming at nothing, but the laws of physics demanded this precise compensation for bullet drop and wind drift. "Range is confirmed and locked," Kim announced. "Environmental readings are stable. All systems are go for the attempt." The assembled crowd of observers had fallen completely silent. Even the special operations team, accustomed to witnessing extraordinary feats of military skill, watched with the focused attention reserved for truly historic moments. Everyone understood that they were potentially about to witness something that would be discussed and remembered for years to come. Marcus felt the familiar calm that always preceded his best shooting. Time seemed to slow down, and his awareness expanded to include every subtle detail of his environment. He could feel the slight warmth of the afternoon sun on his back, the texture of the rifle's stock against his cheek, the gentle pressure of the trigger against the pad of his index finger. The target appeared steady in the scope for a brief moment, the thermal distortion temporarily stabilizing into crystal clarity. This was the moment his grandfather had taught him to recognize, when all the variables aligned and the impossible shot became merely extremely difficult. Marcus began the final phase of his breathing cycle, drawing in a deep breath and letting half of it out before holding steady. His finger took up the last fraction of trigger pressure, and the XM-09's advanced trigger system waited at the precise breakpoint where the slightest additional pressure would release the carefully prepared cartridge. In that suspended moment before the shot, Marcus felt connected to every marksman who had ever attempted the impossible. From frontier hunters taking game at incredible distances to military snipers protecting their comrades from threats beyond visual range, he was part of a tradition that demanded excellence under the most challenging conditions. The desert held its breath, waiting for the thunder that would announce whether a newcomer with an experimental rifle could achieve what dozens of experienced shooters had failed to accomplish. The target waited, motionless and distant, unaware that it was about to become either a testament to human skill or another reminder of the limits of possibility. The XM-09 horizon erupted with a sound like controlled thunder, the muzzle blast sending a shockwave across the desert that could be felt as much as heard. The advanced muzzle brake channeled gases with scientific precision, but the sheer power of the cartridge still created a spectacular display of flame and pressure that momentarily obscured Marcus's view through the scope. For 3.2 seconds, time seemed suspended. The bullet traveled its impossible arc through the desert air, climbing initially as it left the barrel before beginning its long descent toward the distant target. During those seconds, every person on the range held their breath, tracking the projectile's path through high-powered optics, or simply staring at the distant ridge with naked eyes. Williams kept his spotting scope trained on the target area, his experienced eye tracking the bullet's path through atmospheric distortion and heat shimmer. Beside him, Colonel Hayes watched through his own advanced optics, while his team members used sophisticated equipment to measure and record every aspect of the shot's performance. "Flight path looks good," Williams murmured, his voice barely audible over the ringing echoes of the rifle's report. "Trajectory appears to be tracking correctly for range and elevation." The bullet continued its journey through the desert air, passing through multiple layers of atmosphere with varying temperatures, humidity levels, and air density. Each of these factors affected its flight path in ways that the XM-09's ballistics computer had calculated with remarkable precision. But theory and reality were about to meet in the most definitive way possible. Marcus remained frozen behind the rifle, his eye still pressed to the scope despite the fact that the muzzle blast had temporarily obscured his view of the target. Years of training had taught him to follow through after each shot, maintaining his shooting position until he could observe the result. The discipline was automatic now, as natural as breathing. At the halfway point of its journey, the bullet passed through the thermal layer that Ghost had identified earlier. The superheated air caused a slight deviation in its path, but the projectile's design and velocity carried it through the disturbance with minimal effect. The advanced ammunition used in the XM-09 had been specifically engineered for stability at extreme ranges. 2 seconds, Kim announced quietly, his voice tight with anticipation. Everyone on the range understood the significance of what they were witnessing. A successful shot at 2,150 yards would not only validate the XM-09's revolutionary design, but also establish Marcus as one of the most skilled marksmen in military history. Henderson monitored his weather instruments with scientific intensity, noting that conditions had remained remarkably stable throughout the bullet's flight. Wind speed had held steady at 4 miles per hour, temperature variations were minimal, and atmospheric pressure showed no significant changes. From a meteorological standpoint, the shot had been attempted under nearly ideal conditions. As the bullet entered the final phase of its trajectory, dropping rapidly toward the target area, the assembled observers leaned forward in anticipation. The steel plate seemed impossibly small through their various optics, a tiny square of metal waiting to determine whether months of preparation and training would result in triumph or disappointment. The impact, when it came, was unmistakable. Sharp metallic clang echoed across the desert, followed immediately by the sight of the target plate spinning violently on its mounting frame. Through the spotting scopes, observers could see the distinctive crater created by a high-velocity impact, centered almost perfectly on the steel surface. For a moment, complete silence reigned over the shooting range. Then, as the reality of what they had witnessed began to sink in, the assembled soldiers erupted in cheers and applause that could be heard for miles across the desert. "Dead center hit!" Williams shouted, jumping to his feet with an enthusiasm that was completely out of character for the normally reserved sergeant. "The target is down. Perfect impact." Colonel Hayes lowered his spotting scope and turned to look at Marcus with an expression of genuine amazement. In 20 years of military service, including operations in some of the world's most challenging environments, he had never witnessed shooting of this caliber. The precision required to place a bullet accurately at nearly 3,000 yards exceeded anything he had thought humanly possible. "Outstanding shot," Hayes said simply, extending his hand to Marcus. "I've seen some remarkable marksmanship in my career, but what you just accomplished is in a category by itself. That was absolutely extraordinary." Marcus finally lifted his head from the rifle's scope, his face showing a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. The shot had felt right when he pulled the trigger, but at extreme ranges, even perfect execution could be undermined by variables beyond human control. The fact that everything had come together perfectly was both gratifying and somewhat surprising. Ghost was studying the target through his high-powered optics, measuring the impact point with scientific precision. "Sir," he called to Hayes, "the bullet struck within 2 inches of dead center. At that range, we're talking about precision that's almost beyond measurement. The deviation is well within the mechanical accuracy of the rifle system." The camp soldiers surrounded Marcus, offering congratulations and asking questions about the shot. Many of them had been shooting for years, and they understood exactly how difficult the accomplishment had been. What Marcus had just done would become legendary within military marksmanship circles. Sergeant Williams was grinning like a proud father, clearly delighted that his initial assessment of Marcus had been proven correct. "I knew you had something special," he said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "But even I didn't expect you to nail it on the first attempt. Most people need dozens of tries just to get close to the target at that range." The XM-09 Horizon had performed flawlessly, its advanced systems providing the precise calculations and environmental compensation necessary for the extreme shot. But everyone present understood that technology alone could never have achieved what they had just witnessed. The rifle was merely a tool, however sophisticated, and tools were only as effective as the person using them. Henderson was documenting the environmental conditions that had made the shot possible, creating a record that would be valuable for future attempts at similar ranges. "Perfect timing," he muttered, studying his instruments. If he had waited another 10 minutes, thermal activity would have made the shot nearly impossible. The conditions were as close to ideal as we're likely to see. As word of the successful shot spread throughout Camp Thunder Ridge, soldiers began arriving from all corners of the facility. Many had heard the distinctive sound of the XM-09's discharge and came to investigate. Others had been monitoring radio communications and hurried to the range when they learned of the successful hit. The target, nearly 1.75 miles away, bore clear evidence of the bullet's impact. The steel plate showed a clean hole, surrounded by the characteristic deformation pattern of a high-velocity projectile. Recovery teams were already preparing to examine the target and document the precise point of impact for official records. Colonel Hayes gathered his team for a brief conference. Their hushed conversation clearly focused on the implications of what they had witnessed. Marcus's demonstration of extreme precision shooting had obvious applications for special operations missions, and the colonel was undoubtedly considering how such capabilities might be utilized in future operations. Marcus stood beside the XM-09, running his hands along the rifle's advanced systems with newfound respect for the weapon's capabilities. The shot had been a collaboration between human skill and technological innovation, and both elements had performed beyond expectations. Together, they had achieved something that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. 3 hours after the shot that would change everything, Marcus found himself in the base commander's office, still wearing his dusty range clothes and trying to process the whirlwind of events that had followed his successful hit. Colonel Mitchell, the commanding officer of Camp Thunder Ridge, sat behind his desk with a stack of reports and a telephone that hadn't stopped ringing since word of the shot had reached higher headquarters. "Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell said, leaning back in his chair with a mixture of pride and bewilderment, "I've been running training facilities for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened out there today. My phone has been ringing off the hook with calls from Pentagon officials, weapons manufacturers, and military units I'm not even supposed to know exist." The magnitude of what Marcus had accomplished was becoming clearer with each passing hour. The 2,150-yard shot hadn't just been an impressive display of marksmanship, it represented a breakthrough in long-range precision shooting that had immediate implications for military operations worldwide. The combination of the XM-09's advanced technology and Marcus's exceptional skill had achieved what many experts had considered theoretically impossible under field conditions. Outside the office windows, Marcus could see soldiers gathered in small groups, their conversations animated as they discussed the day's events. The betting pool that had started as a joke had paid out handsomely to the few optimists who had wagered on his success. But money seemed trivial compared to the respect and admiration he now saw in every face. Colonel Hayes appeared in the doorway, having changed from his tactical gear into dress uniform. The transformation was striking. Gone was the weathered special operations veteran, replaced by a polished officer whose chest displayed ribbons and decorations that spoke of extraordinary service in classified operations around the world. "Colonel Mitchell," Hayes said, entering the office with the bearing of someone accustomed to high-level briefings. "I've just finished speaking with my commanding officer. There's significant interest in Sergeant Rodriguez's capabilities at the highest levels of our organization. We'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest him." Marcus felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Throughout his military career, he had dreamed of serving with elite units, but the reality of such assignments came with challenges and dangers that most soldiers never faced. Special operations meant deployments to places that didn't appear on maps, missions that were never officially acknowledged, and responsibilities that could affect global security. "What kind of opportunities?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Hayes smiled, recognizing the careful professionalism in the question. "The kind that would put your unique talents to use in situations where precision shooting can mean the difference between mission success and failure. We operate in environments where engaging targets at extreme ranges isn't just impressive. It's often the only way to accomplish our objectives without putting entire teams at risk." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead engineer from the XM-09 development program. She had driven from the manufacturer's testing facility as soon as she received word of the successful shot, bringing with her a team of technicians and enough monitoring equipment to outfit a small laboratory. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Dr. Chen said, extending her hand with obvious enthusiasm. "What you accomplished today validates 5 years of research and development. We've been testing the XM-09 under laboratory conditions for months, but today was the first time anyone has demonstrated its full potential under field conditions. The data we collected from your shot will advance our understanding of extreme-range ballistics by several years." The technical aspects of the shot were indeed remarkable. The bullet had maintained supersonic velocity for over 90% of its flight path, retaining enough energy to penetrate the steel target cleanly, despite traveling nearly 3,000 yards through desert atmosphere. The XM-09's ballistics computer had calculated environmental compensation factors with unprecedented accuracy, but the human element had been equally crucial to the success. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself at the center of a celebration that had spread throughout the entire base. The mess hall had been decorated with handmade banners, and someone had managed to procure a cake decorated with a target design and the numbers 2850 prominently displayed in frosting. The atmosphere was festive, but underneath the celebration was a genuine appreciation for witnessing something truly extraordinary. Sergeant Williams approached Marcus's table, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of a trainer whose student had exceeded all expectations. "You know," he said, settling into the opposite chair, "I've been thinking about what your grandfather would have said about today. I bet he would have been proud as hell, but not surprised. Men like him always seem to know when they're teaching someone special." The comment brought back memories of countless afternoons spent on his grandfather's farm, learning the fundamentals that had made today's success possible. The old man had passed away 2 years earlier, but his lessons lived on in every shot Marcus fired. Patience, precision, respect for the weapon and the target. These weren't just shooting techniques. They were life philosophies that had shaped Marcus into the marksman he had become. Colonel Hayes rejoined the conversation, his expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere around them. "I want you to think carefully about what comes next," he said to Marcus. "The shot you made today opens doors that most soldiers never get to see, but those doors lead to places where the stakes are higher than anything you've experienced so far. Take some time to consider whether that's a path you want to follow." The weight of decision settled over Marcus like a familiar blanket. Throughout his life, He had been drawn to challenges that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. The 2,150-yard shot was just the latest in a series of accomplishments that had consistently exceeded expectations. But he also understood that with extraordinary ability came extraordinary responsibility. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Marcus walked back to the shooting range where it had all happened. The XM-09 Horizon had been secured in its case, but the memory of the perfect shot lingered in the desert air. The target, nearly 2 miles away, was no longer visible in the gathering darkness, but its presence was burned into his memory. Ghost, the special operations observer who had tracked the shot through his sophisticated optics, joined Marcus at the firing line. "You know," he said quietly, "in our line of work we sometimes have to make shots that decide whether missions succeed or fail, whether people live or die. Having someone with your abilities on the team changes everything. It means we can take on missions that would otherwise be impossible." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a courier carrying official orders that had been expedited through military channels. Marcus recognized the distinctive formatting of special assignment paperwork, documents that would determine the direction of his career for years to come. The paperwork represented opportunities that most soldiers could only dream about, but it also meant leaving behind the familiar world of conventional military service. As Marcus stood in the desert darkness, surrounded by the evidence of his extraordinary accomplishment, he realized that the shot that had made him famous was also the shot that would define his future. The 2,150-yard hit hadn't just struck a steel target. It had launched him into a realm of military service where precision shooting became an art form practiced in defense of national security. The XM-09 Horizon had proven its revolutionary capabilities. Dr. Chen's engineering team had validated years of research and development, and the special operations community had identified a marksman whose skills could change the outcome of critical missions. But most importantly, a young soldier from a small farming town had discovered that the lessons his grandfather had taught him about patience, precision, and respect for the craft of marksmanship could achieve things that seemed impossible. The target at 2,050 yards would be recovered and preserved as evidence of what human skill and advanced technology could accomplish together. But the real legacy of that perfect shot would be measured in future missions where extreme precision shooting would make the difference between success and failure, between life and death, between protecting the innocent and allowing evil to flourish. Marcus Rodriguez had arrived at Camp Thunder Ridge as a promising young marksman. He would leave as a legend, carrying with him the knowledge that when everything depended on a single shot, he had the skill and courage to make it count.